All right, welcome back to the lecture on focus on focus. And in this lecture, we are now talking about the differences between focus and emphasis and dominance and how all of that relates to the overall issue of hierarchy, how a painting or an image directs our attention, or any work of art directs our attention to certain things versus other things. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the work of Andy Goldsworthy, and just how very cleverly he uses just simple, simple groupings of natural objects as a way of creating very interesting design ideas. But it's all about eye movement and direction of attention, um, and really, to a certain degree, all visual design is just about visual pathways and directing of attention, creating hierarchies between what's dominant and what's subordinate. So let's take a look at these two paintings just for a second and see how different they work, right? Right off the bat, we can kind of see this painting is by Giacometti, by the way. Right off the bat, we can see that the Bonnard has a lot more going on, right? And there's a lot of these kind of secondary and tertiary areas of focus. So there's a need for a lot more complex type hierarchy for us to kind of organize how our eye moves through the space and what our attention is, given to. Whereas in the Giacometti, it's much more, simple and direct, right? We have one moment of very, very intense attention and focus, and then this very kind of like, you know, very quickly moving out beyond that to a hand, a type of painting that's pretty much saying, don't pay attention to the space around this moment, except to know that there's a space out here and to kind of know that it has a mood and a feel, right? And I guess the other thing I want to say about the Giacometti, which will then tie into the Bonnard, is that one of the things that's interesting about painting is that attention itself, the attention that a painter puts to a certain moment, to a certain area, is also in a way a direction for attention. Like that when you look at a painting, your eye is generally going to go to the areas where the artist, him or herself, put a lot of attention to it. So that in the act of making a work, the areas that you are very loose and gestural with and for a second pass, those areas are going to, in general, draw less attention. And those areas where you're really, really, you keep returning to and you keep trying to fix and get quite right, and you're not satisfied until it's really, really perfect, those are going to be the areas, because you put a lot of attention on it, that is also going to be the areas in the painting, and this is true in general, um, that the viewer, the audience, is also going to be putting attention to. And you can see that same kind of issue here in the Bonnard. Certain areas just seem to draw our attention more, in part because of how much attention the artist himself put on them, right? But then there's another thing that he does, which is part of his whole willingness to kind of let edges between things kind of dissolve into each other, and let like cool lights just dissolve into other cool lights, or like the soft, the merging of edges there. Part of that is a way to control how much attention we are placing on things. Instead of allowing everything to be super hard edged, right? It allows things to dissolve a little bit into the space, right? And so it's, in a way, it's kind of like a modernist version of what the Baroque did, which was allowing things to kind of dissolve into the darkness of shadow, was also a way of controlling attention. This is a similar kind of device, right? So now I think we can see this painting a lot more clearly as to how some of these, I think some of you may have remembered in the last discussion, I said something like about how in Baroque painting, value and, value contrast is the primary language in many Baroque paintings. It's the primary language of creating focus and emphasis and hierarchy. And it's also the primary language of creating contrast, and that those two things can be true. And you can kind of see how the change of value, allowing stuff to just kind of dissolve into the darkness, is a way of telling us this really is something you don't need to pay a lot of attention to. And then the really strong, scathing light being on certain things, and those really light things popping out of the darkness is a way of telling us this is an area that you really need to pay a lot of attention to because this is the center focus of the painting. And then if we look here at the Hans Hofmann, it's a very different kind of language about focus. Um, Speaking of focus, I was just looking at like close up of this painting the other day as I was correcting papers, and I was noticing like the line work on the foot right there, and wasn't even aiming to look at this hand, but looking at this really up close, it's amazing to me how so much of this detail is painted much looser and with really soft edges, like not a really hard, precise edge, um, and how that really helps to create the illusion that that's a low focus area compared to the crispness that he places in some other areas. Okay, getting back to the Hoffman. This is a very abstract version of focus, right? Which is the really crisp edges and the shapes that really kind of pop forward because they're literally placed on top and they have a little bit of a physical edge that they're, a half, like a millimeter closer to us. And then these other areas where the edges are much softer, right? That's a contrast of focus. There's a lot more focus to this and to that, to these areas compared to here or to like these soft areas right there. Now, sometimes you can have like, that's a soft edge that's just a really, literally a soft edge. This is a soft edge just because these two colors are very similar to each other in value and in color. And so they merge together just by that. Even though if you actually went up to the painting, you'd see that physically there is actually a pretty sharp edge, not as sharp as that right there. Okay, this is the last piece, and I want you to think about how a painting like this, now that we really think about how dominance, right, and emphasis and hierarchy and focus, how all of those are working together, and how this is in a way a masterpiece of how a painter can control our attention and tell us what to look at first and why. How does he attract our attention there, and then what becomes second. And this is a painting built out of primary focuses, but also secondary and tertiary, and just layers and layers of focus. Everything is interesting, right? There are all these little interesting details, and yet he manages to make sure that we're not overwhelmed by it. We see the main things first, and then the secondary things, then the tertiary, and then all the other stuff. We see it in parts. Okay, I think that is the end. Yep, that is the end. So we'll end there, and I'll meet you at the last lecture, which will be us talking about the art impulse for this lecture, telling it like it is. All right, see you there.